Rain misted across the windshield as the car rolled to a stop at the edge of a forgotten field. The last light of day hung low, turning the sky the color of bruised steel. Linda Brooks stepped out slowly, one hand braced against her belly, the other gripping a wrinkled letter damp from her sweat. Her boots sank into the soft mud, every step echoing the ache of a journey too long and too lonely. Ahead stood the old farmhouse, windows boarded, paint peeled, the world long moved on without it. She pushed the front door open with her shoulder. Dust floated through the beam of her phone light like quiet ghosts. On the mantel, a cracked photo frame showed a man she barely remembered. A faint sound carried from outside, a door moving somewhere in the wind. Linda turned toward the dark outline of the barn. Was someone waiting inside? What would you do if this happened to you? Tell us where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe. Your support helps us bring you more powerful stories. And stay tuned, because tomorrow's story is one you won't want to miss. Morning rose pale and heavy over the fields, the light muted as though unsure whether to stay. Linda stepped outside wrapped in her jacket, one hand steadying her belly, the other shielding her eyes from the glare. The air smelled of rain that never came, of soil baked too long and left forgotten. Before her stretched acres of cracked earth, the kind that told stories of labor and abandonment. Metal stakes stuck from the ground in uneven rows, some leaning, some half buried by time. Each was capped with a number scrawled in faded paint. They looked too deliberate to be random, like coordinates from a plan no one finished. She knelt to touch one. It was cold, even under the weak sun. Beneath her palm, the metal hummed faintly, almost as if alive. A wind cut through the open space, sweeping bits of dry grass into spirals. She turned toward the barn, the same one she'd seen the night before. Dark, slanted, still holding its shape against decades of storms. Her grandfather had built this land with his hands. Now it felt more like a riddle left behind than a home. The farmhouse was silent except for the creak of floorboards under her boots. She made her way to a back room where she had stacked some of the things she'd found the night before. Old boxes, tools, yellowed papers bound in leather. One notebook caught her attention. Its cover was cracked but sturdy, its pages filled with strange numbers and diagrams. Circles and lines intersected across the paper like a coded language. Some pages were marked with stains that looked almost like burns. Every few lines, the same words appeared in neat, block handwriting. Project Aegis. She traced them with her fingertip. The names sounded familiar in a way she couldn't explain, like a half-remembered story from childhood. There were sketches too, engines, tubes, what looked like power cells connected by slender wiring. On another page, a simple sentence stood alone in the corner. If they find it, they'll use it. Her chest tightened. She didn't know who they were, but the warning made her stomach twist. Linda packed the notebooks into a canvas bag and made her way outside again. The barn loomed large against the morning sky, its roof bent, its doors clinging to rusted hinges. She pushed one open. It let out a long groan, and a wave of cold air rolled out from the dark interior. Dust hung thick, disturbed only by her breath and the sound of her boots scraping the floor. Tools leaned where someone had left them years ago. A tractor wheel. A rusted chain. A half-finished machine of some kind sat in the corner, its purpose lost to time. As she moved deeper, the floorboards creaked beneath her, each step echoing in the hollow space. Near the back wall, something odd caught her eye. A wheelbarrow was turned upside down, one handle snapped clean off. Its position felt deliberate, as though hiding something. She dragged it aside, the metal screeching against the wood. Beneath it, A square outline in the dust revealed a trapdoor with heavy iron hinges. Her pulse quickened. She crouched, wiping away the dirt until she could see the lock. It was thick and old, streaked with rust but intact. Hanging on a nail nearby was a ring of keys, each one different, some small, some long enough to look like they belonged to a vault. Her hands shook as she tried the first key. No luck. The second slid in but refused to turn. On the fourth attempt, she felt a soft click, followed by a creak so deep it sent a shiver through her chest. The lock released. A cold draft drifted up through the seam, smelling of metal and oil. Linda lifted the hatch. Darkness yawned beneath her, stairs descending into what looked like an underground cellar. She hesitated at the top, her heart knocking against her ribs. Her phone flashlight cut through the dark in a narrow beam, illuminating the steps one by one. The wood felt damp under her boots as she descended. Each breath grew heavier, the air sharper, filled with a chemical tang. When she reached the bottom, her light caught something unexpected. A concrete floor lined with rows of wooden crates stacked almost to the ceiling. Every crate was stenciled with the same faded word: confidential. The space felt frozen in time, like someone had sealed it away and walked out without looking back. A workbench stood against one wall, covered in tools, vials, and sealed jars. A layer of dust coated everything, yet nothing seemed random. She approached one crate and brushed off the dirt. The wood was solid, nailed tight. She looked around and found a crowbar leaning against the bench. With effort, she wedged it under the lid and pried until the wood gave way with a dry crack. Inside, a faint glow pulsed from a bundle of metal fragments wrapped in thick fabric. They shimmered faintly, shifting between silver and blue under her light. She reached out, hesitant, then touched one piece with the tip of her finger. It was cold, colder than the air around it, but vibrated with a quiet hum that seemed to run up her arm. Beneath the fragments lay a folder bound in red tape. She opened it slowly, revealing old patents and detailed diagrams. There were energy output charts, conversion rates, reactor designs, all handwritten and stamped with government seals. The top page read, Prototype Energy Cell, Estimated Yield, 1.2 terawatts. She couldn't fully understand the meaning, but the scale of it sank in. This wasn't just research, it was a breakthrough. Something powerful. Something that could change everything. She flipped through the documents, her breathing quickening with each page. Some of the sketches matched the blueprints from her grandfather's notebooks. Others bore the emblem of a company she didn't recognize, a circle with 3 slanted lines cutting through it. For a moment she forgot to breathe. Her grandfather had been dismissed as eccentric, a man who locked himself away in his workshop until the end of his life. Yet here was proof he had created something revolutionary, something the world never knew existed. The silence in the cellar thickened. She could hear only the faint hum of the metal pieces inside the crate. Her phone buzzed in her hand, battery at 10%. She turned, planning to head back upstairs before the light died. That's when she heard it. A sound above her. Soft. Careful. Too heavy to be the wind. She froze, head tilted toward the ceiling. The boards creaked again, slow, deliberate. Someone was walking across the barn floor. Her flashlight trembled in her grip. Dust rained down from between the cracks, faint but visible in the beam. Whoever it was, they were close. She held her breath. Another step. Then another. The footsteps stopped directly above her. Linda turned off her light. The dark swallowed her whole. For several seconds, nothing moved. The only sound was her heartbeat thudding in her ears. Her hand found the wall beside her, rough and cold. She pressed her palm flat, steadying her breathing, waiting. A hinge groaned somewhere above. The barn door closing? Or someone trying to keep quiet? A sharp knock sounded against the floorboard near the trapdoor. Once, then twice, like testing for hollow spots. She backed away slowly, clutching the folder to her chest. Her foot bumped into the crate, and the metal fragments inside gave a faint, musical ring. Silence followed. She waited. A minute. Then 2. Finally, the steps began to fade. Slow, steady, leaving the barn the same way they came. When she was sure she was alone, she turned the light back on. Her reflection caught in a piece of polished metal. Eyes wide, face pale, breath short. The glow from the fragments pulsed again, faintly rhythmic, as though in response to her heartbeat. Whatever this was, someone else already knew about it. Linda climbed the stairs one careful step at a time, closed the trapdoor, and slid the wheelbarrow back into place. The barn seemed unchanged, yet every sound now carried weight. She stepped outside into the daylight, clutching the papers close. The wind had shifted, colder, sharper, filled with the quiet warning of a secret no longer safe. Linda stepped out of the barn, still clutching the folder to her chest, her breath sharp in the cool air. The sunlight had shifted, stretching long shadows across the yard. Her eyes caught movement beyond the gate, a black SUV parked by the road, engine running, sleek and out of place amid the rust and dust of the farm. A man stood beside it. Tall, composed, expensive shoes untouched by dirt. His suit looked freshly pressed, his expression calm but unreadable. When he saw her, he smiled in that practiced way that never reached the eyes. "Miss Brooks," he called, his voice polite, confident. She didn't answer. The instinct to retreat kicked in, but it was too late. He was already walking toward her, slow and deliberate, the crunch of gravel under his shoes steady as a metronome. "I'm sorry to intrude," he said, stopping a few feet away. "My name is Mr. Langford. I represent Orion Technologies. I believe this property now belongs to you." Linda frowned. "You believe, right? How do you know that?" He ignored the question. "Your grandfather, Silas Brooks, conducted extensive research for our company several decades ago. Unfortunately, there were unresolved matters when he passed." She tightened her grip on the folder. "He didn't pass. He disappeared. Everyone said he was dead, but there was never proof." Langford tilted his head, almost sympathetic. "A matter of wording, I suppose. What's important is that his work, his intellectual property, was never formally released from Orion's ownership. You see the problem." She stared at him. "What problem?" "The property you now own sits atop restricted materials," he said, tone still smooth but colder now. "Sensitive equipment. We'd like to make a formal offer to purchase the land. It would spare you a great deal of trouble." Linda took a step back. "You mean the land with a decaying barn and no running water? Why would a tech company want that?" Langford's smile didn't move. "Because it holds things that don't belong to you." The words landed like ice. "I'm not selling," she said quietly. "You may want to reconsider," he replied, lowering his voice. "This isn't just about property, Miss Brooks. You've inherited liability, legal, financial, potentially criminal if the wrong items are found here." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a crisp envelope, holding it out to her. "This is an official proposal from Orion. We can settle quickly and privately. Sign, and this all disappears." She didn't take it. "You need to leave." Langford's hand remained suspended in the air for a moment before he slipped the envelope back into his coat. "You remind me of your grandfather," he said, almost kindly. "Stubbornness runs deep in the family." It didn't end well for him either. The way he said it, casual, effortless, made her skin prickle. "Good day, Miss Brooks." He turned and walked back to the SUV, the vehicle pulling away with a whisper of tires on gravel. Linda stood motionless until the sound faded into the wind. When she finally moved, it was to check the lock on the barn. The metal ring still hung in place, but the edges looked disturbed, as if someone had handled it before her. By the time she reached the farmhouse, unease had settled like dust in her chest. Tire tracks cut fresh lines into the dirt near the porch. 2 sets, heavy and recent. Her front door was slightly ajar. Her pulse jumped. She stepped inside carefully, scanning the room. The curtains swayed from an open window. A chair had been moved. The stack of notebooks she left on the kitchen table was gone. No, not gone. Reordered. Someone had touched them. She called out, her voice barely a whisper. "Hello." Silence. Only the slow tick of the wall clock that hadn't worked in years. She backed toward the stairs, locking the door behind her. The quiet house felt different now, as if watching her. She checked every window, then every room. Nothing missing, but everything wrong. By nightfall, rain clouds gathered, and the hum of insects gave way to a low mechanical sound somewhere in the distance. Steady, constant. She turned off the lights, listening. The sound came closer, faded, then returned. Engines. Maybe 2, maybe 3. Linda pulled the curtains closed and dragged a rug aside in the living room. The floorboards underneath were uneven, one plank slightly raised. She pried it open and slid the folder, her grandfather's notes, and the glowing metal fragment inside the space. The board creaked as she pressed it back down. She sat on the couch in the dark, staring at the empty doorway. Her fingers found the silver pendant that hung around her neck, a gift from her fiancé, Daniel, before the accident. The metal felt warm from her skin. She closed her fist around it. "If you were here," she whispered, voice shaking, "you'd know what to do." Thunder rolled in the distance. The engines faded. Only the wind remained, carrying the faint scent of smoke from somewhere she couldn't see. The rain didn't stop for 3 days. It came in steady sheets that blurred the horizon and turned the yard into mud. The barn still stood, though the roof sagged deeper now, rain seeping through the cracks. Linda stayed inside, curtains drawn, the world reduced to the sound of water and the flicker of lamplight across her grandfather's papers spread across the kitchen table. The notebooks were older than she thought. Some handwritten in black ink that had bled for moisture, others typed on brittle paper yellowed at the edges. A few were marked top secret and stamped with dates from the 1950s and 60s. At first, the words meant little. Numbers, equations, sketches of circuits and reactor cores. But the more she read, the more a story began to form. Silas Brooks had been a military engineer, brilliant, restless, impatient with limits. During the Cold War, he'd led a research unit exploring renewable energy sources to outpace the Soviet race for nuclear dominance. That's when he conceived Project Aegis, a self-sustaining energy reactor that could power entire cities without waste or fuel. His notes called it a gift to end dependency, to make power clean and infinite. It sounded impossible, almost fantastical. Yet his calculations were meticulous, his designs sound. Linda turned a page and found a series of letters written to an unknown recipient, signed only with the initials SB and CL. The letters spoke of investors pulling out, budgets collapsing, and promises broken. Then a name appeared: Orion Technologies. At first, Orion had backed Silas's work, providing funding and facilities. But the tone of his writing shifted as months passed. They want control. They talk about defense contracts, about strategic applications. I told them no. This isn't a weapon. They don't listen. Her hand tightened on the page. The man everyone thought had lost his mind hadn't been crazy. He'd been cornered. Another entry, dated 6 months later, read, "They gave me 2 choices, hand it over or disappear. I'll choose the third." Below it, in smaller writing, "If you're reading this, it means they never found it. Good. Keep it that way." Linda sat back, stunned. Her grandfather hadn't died in an accident. He'd faked his death to protect the invention, and whoever might come after him. She flipped through the following entries, tracing his paranoia growing into isolation. He wrote about dismantling the prototype, hiding the components across the property, encrypting files into coded ledgers so complex they couldn't be decoded without the right key. One note, almost like a farewell, read, "When the world is ready, it will find the light again. Until then, bury it deep." She rubbed her eyes, exhaustion pulling at her. Outside, thunder grumbled low across the valley. Hours later, she found a folder tucked inside one of the notebooks. It contained maps, rough sketches of his land with symbols marked in red. The barn, the well, the silo at the far edge of the property. Each location circled with handwritten coordinates. She realized she hadn't just inherited land. She'd inherited a vault of hidden power, something worth billions, maybe more. Something that people like Langford would do anything to claim. Her phone buzzed suddenly, jolting her. Unknown number. She hesitated before answering. A man's voice came through, polished, calm, too formal. "Miss Brooks? This is Howard Keene, legal counsel for Orion Technologies. I'm calling to inform you that your possession of restricted materials constitutes a violation of federal intellectual property law. We'll be sending a written notice within the week." Linda's throat went dry. "I don't have anything of yours. I think you'll find that your grandfather's work never ceased to belong to us," Keene replied. "Failure to cooperate will lead to seizure of the property and potential prosecution." "You can't threaten me for something that's mine," she snapped, but her voice trembled. "We don't make threats, Miss Brooks. We issue consequences." The line went dead. Linda lowered the phone, her fingers shaking. The kitchen light flickered once and steadied. She realized she hadn't taken a full breath since the call began. That night, she barely slept. Every creak of the house felt amplified, every gust of wind like a whisper outside her window. She got up more than once to check the locks. By dawn, her nerves felt raw. She made coffee and stood by the window, trying to clear her head. That's when she noticed a faint buzz above the hum of the rain, a high electric sound that didn't belong to the storm. She stepped outside, scanning the sky. The noise grew louder, sharper. Her eyes caught a small shape hovering near the tree-line, sleek, black, about the size of a hawk. A drone. Its lens glinted briefly before it drifted closer, tilting toward her like an unblinking eye. Her pulse surged. She grabbed a shovel leaning against the porch and waited, heart hammering. When the drone dropped low enough, she swung. The metal connected with a satisfying crack. Sparks flew. The drone spiraled down into the mud with a hiss of broken circuits. Linda stood over it, breathless, rain sliding down her face. The shattered shell still blinked faintly, its red light pulsing once, twice, then fading. She bent to pick it up. The casing bore a faint logo etched into the side, 3 slanted lines within a circle. The same symbol she'd seen in her grandfather's documents. Her stomach turned. They weren't just watching, they'd been here all along. She carried the wreckage inside, wrapping it in an old towel. The weight of what she held felt heavier than metal. At the kitchen table, she stared at the broken drone beside her grandfather's journals. 2 worlds collided there, the past and the present, the old war and a new one she hadn't asked to fight. As the storm raged outside, Linda began copying the most important pages into a new notebook, her hands moving fast. For every threat Orion made, she would make a record. For every secret they wanted buried, she would uncover the truth. Her eyes landed on one final passage, written in faint pencil. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you protect when no one else will. She whispered the words aloud, her voice barely above the rain. By the time night returned, she had sealed the journals inside a metal trunk beneath the floorboards. She checked the locks again, turned off the lights, and sat in the silence that followed. Somewhere out in the dark, an engine passed by and slowed near the edge of her drive before fading into the distance. Linda didn't move. She kept her hand on her belly, steady, breathing through the fear until the noise was gone. The world beyond her window was no longer empty. It was watching. By the next afternoon, Linda could no longer keep the weight of it to herself. The tension had worn her raw. Every shadow on the horizon, every passing car felt like someone watching. She needed another voice, someone who had known Silas before the stories turned him into a ghost. At the county library, a clerk pointed her to Ethan Marsh, a retired historian who lived just a few miles from town. He had written an article decades ago about experimental energy research during the Cold War and had once exchanged letters with her grandfather. Ethan's home sat tucked behind a thicket of oak trees, the kind of place that smelled like old books and pipe smoke. He opened the door himself, tall and soft-spoken, his gray hair tied back in a loose tail. "You look just like him," he said when she introduced herself. "Same eyes." Silas always said curiosity skipped a generation. Linda forced a smile. "I wish I'd known him. People made it sound like he went crazy." Ethan motioned for her to sit. "He wasn't crazy. He was too smart for the people funding him. They wanted control, not progress." She told him everything: the inheritance, the barn, the trapdoor, the crates marked confidential. She showed him a copy of the folder she'd found. Ethan's expression tightened the further he read. When she finished, he leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Orion Technologies still exists, you know. Not in name, maybe, but under new branches, new investors. Defense contracts, energy research, artificial intelligence. They've never stopped hunting what your grandfather built." "So what do they want now?" she asked. "The same thing they wanted back then," he said. "Power. What he created could upend every industry on the planet. And if what you've found is even a fraction of the original prototype, they'll never let you keep it. They have allies, people in high places who'll make you look like a thief on your own land." Linda's voice lowered. "What should I do?" Ethan exhaled through his nose, eyes heavy. "Leave. Tonight if you can. Take whatever proof you have. Get somewhere safe. You can't fight a company like that." Silas tried, and it nearly killed him. The words landed with a cold certainty that made her chest ache. She wanted to argue, but she saw truth in his eyes. Still, part of her refused to walk away. "He didn't hide all this just for me to run." Ethan's jaw tightened. "He hid it so you'd survive." She thanked him and left before sunset, rain beginning to whisper through the trees. By the time she reached the farmhouse, thunder rolled over the valley. The power flickered once, then held steady. She packed what she could into a duffel, the most vital notebooks, the copies of patents, her phone, the pendant Daniel had given her before he died. She hesitated by the window, watching as the storm deepened. At first, she thought the light outside was lightning. But it didn't fade. It moved. 2 headlights glided slowly up the dirt road, cutting through the sheets of rain. They stopped near the barn. Another pair appeared seconds later. Engines idled low. Her breath caught. Linda crouched near the window and pulled the curtain just enough to see. 3 figures stepped out, flashlights slicing through the dark. One wore a coat she recognized even through the blur of rain. Langford. He said something she couldn't hear, and the men followed him toward the barn. Panic surged through her chest. They weren't here to talk. She grabbed her duffel and crept through the back door, her shoes sinking into mud as she moved around the house. She stayed low, keeping the wind at her back. From her angle, she could see Langford pull the barn door open. A beam of light swept across the inside. He disappeared in after it. Linda hesitated. She couldn't run yet. Not without at least seeing what they were doing. She edged closer, crouching behind a tractor, rain sliding down her face. Through a crack in the barn wall, she saw Langford kneel near the far corner. One of the men pried up the wheelbarrow she'd used to cover the trapdoor. Her stomach dropped. "Found it," one of them said. Langford's flashlight beam froze on the metal handle of the hatch. He smiled faintly. "I told you she'd open it." Linda pressed a hand against her mouth, fighting the urge to make a sound. Langford motioned to the second man, who knelt and forced the trapdoor open. He peered down, said something she couldn't hear, then started down the steps. That was her moment. She turned and ran, her steps muffled by the storm. Mud sucked at her heels, but she didn't stop. The night swallowed her as she cut through the back fields, weeds brushing against her legs. Behind her, a flash of light lit up the sky, followed by a muffled thump. She turned. They were carrying something out of the barn, metal cases, papers, whatever they could grab. Her lungs burned. She clutched the duffel tighter against her chest. The rain made everything blur. She stumbled once, barefoot now after losing a shoe in the mud, but she pushed on until the barn was only a dark smudge behind her. She stopped under a cluster of trees to catch her breath. Her fingers dug through the bag until she found one of the smaller notebooks. She flipped it open, desperate for guidance, for anything that made sense. Near the back, scrawled in her grandfather's uneven handwriting, were words she'd missed before. "If they come for it, go to the silo. Trust the earth." She mouthed the words to herself. The silo. Lightning tore through the clouds, and for an instant, she could see the outline of the old grain silo far across the property, barely visible beyond the tree-line. The thunder came almost at once, and then a deeper sound followed. A blast. She turned. A bloom of orange fire rose from where the barn stood, lighting the valley in violent color. The shockwave reached her seconds later, knocking leaves from the trees. The heat carried the scent of burning oil and wood. The sky churned with smoke. She fell to her knees, clutching the notebook as Ash drifted toward her. Her eyes stung, but she couldn't look away. Everything her grandfather had hidden, everything she had just begun to understand, gone in one violent instant. But his message echoed in her mind. Go to the silo. Trust the earth. Linda wiped the rain from her face and stood again. The fire roared behind her, devouring the barn, its light stretching across the fields like dawn. She turned toward the darkness beyond it, where the silo waited unseen but certain. She took her first step forward, barefoot, soaked, the notebook pressed to her heart. She didn't look back again. The wind dragged long ribbons of mist across the valley as Linda reached the far edge of the property. Her breath showed pale in the cold morning air. The storm that had swallowed the night had passed, but the ground was still slick, the scent of burned wood still clinging to her clothes. She kept walking, one arm cradling her stomach, the other clutching the notebook that had led her here. The land dipped slightly beyond the last row of dying trees. That's where she saw it, a gray silhouette rising from the field like a forgotten monument. The silo leaned slightly to one side, its surface strangled by vines and moss. Metal flakes peeled off in places where rain had eaten away the paint. It looked less like a building and more like something nature had tried to bury. Her pulse quickened. The message in her grandfather's handwriting repeated in her mind like a prayer. If they come for it, go to the silo. Trust the earth. She ran her fingers along the door seam. It was cold and stiff, sealed by decades of silence. Rust had fused the handle to the frame. She braced her shoulder against it and pushed. The metal groaned before giving way, spilling a wave of air that smelled of old grain and oil. Inside, darkness waited. Linda flicked on her phone's flashlight. The beam cut through the dust, revealing a hollow cylinder of space lined with metal ribs. The floor ended abruptly in the middle, where a square platform sat recessed in the concrete. An elevator. An old control panel stood nearby, its screen cracked, its buttons dull with grime. She hesitated, her mind caught between fear and necessity. Whatever her grandfather wanted her to find was down there. She wiped the control panel clean with her sleeve. Beneath the grime, faint letters glowed red. Manual override. She pressed it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a low hum spread through the walls, growing louder as gears locked into place. The elevator platform trembled beneath her feet, followed by a slow, descending pull. The light from above shrank until it was a coin in the darkness. The shaft's walls slid past her, steel pipes, bolts, each one reflecting her small beam of light. The air grew colder, heavier. She could hear her heartbeat in her ears, steady but fast. After a long minute, the elevator stopped with a sigh. A mechanical door slid open, releasing a draft of air that carried the faint scent of ozone and dust. Her flashlight swept across the space beyond, and caught on something extraordinary. The chamber was vast, circular, and built from smooth concrete. Emergency lights embedded in the walls flickered weakly, washing everything in pale amber. Along the edges stood rows of storage units and filing cabinets, covered in a thick layer of dust. Old computers sat silent on metal tables, their screens blank. And in the center of the room stood a vault door, massive and untouched, the words Aegis Archive etched across its face. Linda moved closer, her footsteps echoing softly. The air hummed faintly, as if the machinery around her was still alive, still waiting. She brushed her hand over the vault's cold surface. The wheel lock resisted her at first, then turned with a hollow metallic groan. Dust fell like ash as the door cracked open. The air inside was even colder. Rows of shelves stretched into the dimness, filled with binders, film reels, and metallic data drives. Some were labeled with years: 1961, 1974, 1980. Others bore only a simple emblem, a circle bisected by a lightning bolt. Her beam of light caught on something resting on a table near the back, a small case made of brushed steel, polished despite the decades. Her breath caught when she saw the engraving on its lid. Linda Brooks. Her name. She stood frozen, the weight of the moment pressing down like gravity. Her grandfather had died before she was born. How could he have known her name? Her fingers trembled as she lifted the latch. The hinges creaked softly. Inside, beneath a layer of protective cloth, lay a sealed envelope and a set of folded blueprints tied with a strip of faded ribbon. The handwriting on the envelope was the same as the note that had led her here. Her throat tightened. She unfolded the paper carefully, afraid it might crumble from age. My dearest Linda, if you are reading this, then time has carried my work and my burden into your hands. Decades ago, I built something meant to free the world from its hunger for power. A self-sustaining energy source drawn from the smallest particles of matter. I called it Project Aegis. It could power cities, end wars, erase borders built on fuel and fear. But the men who funded me saw only weapons. They would have turned light into destruction. So I burned my lab and buried the truth beneath this land. I left clues only for blood, because I believed one day a Brooks would rise without greed, without fear, and see what this could mean if used right. The world wasn't ready for what I built. Perhaps you will be. Guard it well. It can power cities or destroy them. Choose light. The words blurred as her eyes filled. She pressed the letter to her chest, feeling its tremor against her heartbeat. In the silence that followed, the hum of old machinery seemed to pulse through the floor like a heartbeat answering her own. She imagined her grandfather here, alone, sealing away his life's work, hoping someone would find it when humanity could bear it. She set the letter down and untied the ribbon from the blueprints. Unfolding them revealed dense sketches, circuits, energy cells, containment cores, beyond her comprehension, but breathtaking in their precision. One note scribbled in the margin caught her attention. The human heart generates more energy than any machine. The key is trust. She touched the ink, faded but still legible, and whispered, I trust you. Her phone buzzed suddenly, a low vibration in her pocket. She froze. There was no signal this deep underground. It wasn't her phone. It was something else. A low rumble shook the chamber. Dust fell from the ceiling in a slow rain. Somewhere far above, a mechanical system powered on, heavy and deliberate. Linda snapped the case shut and backed toward the elevator. Her hand found the wall for balance, her breathing sharp. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. Was it an automated system restarting? Or had someone found the controls? The elevator platform loomed ahead, still open, the control panel blinking faintly. She hesitated before stepping onto it, clutching the steel case and the letter against her chest. Choose light, she whispered again. As the platform began to rise, her reflection caught briefly in the polished steel of the case. Pale, tired, but resolute. She didn't yet know who else was coming for what she'd found. Only that her grandfather had trusted her with something the world wasn't meant to touch. When she reached the top, the first sound that met her was the wind moving through the fields, steady, endless, alive. For a moment, she stood there in the open doorway of the silo, staring out over the horizon where smoke still lingered from the burned barn. The letter's last words echoed in her mind like a promise. Guard it well. Choose light. But what if light wasn't enough to keep the darkness away? Would you protect the truth if it meant carrying it alone? The first crack of dawn had barely brushed the horizon when Linda heard the distant growl of engines. It started as a faint vibration beneath her boots, the kind of sound you feel before you truly hear it. She froze halfway between the silo and the line of trees that framed the property. Then, a flash of light swept through the mist. Headlights. They had found her. Her pulse surged. She turned back toward the silo, clutching the metal case to her chest. The open doorway yawned before her like a throat of black iron. She had barely escaped it once, but now it was her only chance to hide. She slipped inside, closing the heavy door behind her until only a sliver of daylight remained. The air was cool and dry. Each step she took echoed softly through the hollow shaft as she descended the narrow stairwell that spiraled down beside the elevator track. The hum of approaching vehicles grew louder above. Gravel crunched. Doors slammed. Voices, distant but sharp, cut through the morning quiet. Fan out. She's here somewhere. Langford. His voice was unmistakable, calm, confident, like someone giving orders in a boardroom instead of a hunt. Linda's throat tightened. Her fingers brushed over the wall until she reached the bottom. The elevator still sat in its lowered position. She slipped into the chamber beyond, the Aegis archive, its emergency lights still glowing faintly from the night before. She had only seconds. Thinking fast, she pried open one of the smaller cabinets and crawled inside, leaving the steel case and letter hidden beneath a stack of blueprints in the corner. She pulled the cabinet door shut just as heavy footsteps reached the bottom of the stairwell. Langford's voice carried, distorted by the walls. "This is it." Brooks' records said the access point was buried under this property. "We take everything. No traces." Another man answered, "Sir, there's structural instability down here." "Shouldn't we?" Langford cut him off. "Do I look like I care about the structure? Set the charges. We're clearing this site." Linda pressed her hand against her mouth, holding in a gasp. Her heart hammered so hard she could feel it shaking the metal around her. Through the crack in the cabinet, she saw beams of light move across the chamber, flashlights slicing through the dark. Dust stirred in their wake like drifting snow. She heard the men moving around the vault, setting down metal cases, muttering under their breath. One of them brushed past the cabinet where she hid. The air grew tight with the smell of oil and sweat. A sharp click followed, the sound of a detonator being armed. Langford's voice again, cold and close now. "Orion will recover what we can from the wreckage. But this site dies today. Her grandfather thought he could hide from us. He was wrong. She will learn the same lesson." Her nails dug into her palms. She wanted to shout, to stop them, but one sound could end everything. Minutes passed like hours. When the last footstep receded, Linda pushed the cabinet door open just enough to peer out. The men were gathered near the elevator shaft, wires stretching across the floor, blinking red lights attached to each column. There had to be a way out. Her eyes darted to the far wall, a section she hadn't noticed before. A faded sign read, "Maintenance Access," with an arrow pointing toward a narrow tunnel partially hidden by a collapsed beam. She crouched low, gathering her strength, and crept along the shadows. Every movement sent small echoes bouncing across the chamber. She stopped each time a voice rose, waiting, then continued. By the time she reached the tunnel entrance, Langford was already climbing back onto the elevator platform. "Light it," he ordered. Her breath caught. She slipped into the tunnel just as the platform began to rise. The moment it cleared the upper hatch, a sharp beep echoed through the vault. Then came the explosion. The world turned white. A thunderous roar filled her ears, swallowing every sound. The tunnel shook violently, chunks of debris raining down as the shockwave rushed through. Linda was thrown forward, scraping her hands on the rough metal as the blast tore through the chamber behind her. For a moment, everything was just noise and light and heat. Then, silence. She lay there, trembling, her palms bleeding where she'd tried to catch herself. The tunnel groaned above her, settling but holding. Smoke drifted in through the cracks. The air tasted like metal and dust. She pushed herself up slowly, coughing, and pressed forward through the narrow passage. The tunnel bent upward, leading to a small hatch. She climbed the rusted ladder, one slow step at a time. When she finally forced the hatch open, the cool air of dawn poured in. She emerged behind a hill at the far edge of the property. The fields were covered in a soft gray fog. She turned just in time to see the silo shudder violently. The ground rippled beneath it, splitting like cracked glass. A deep rumble rolled through the earth as the entire structure began to sink, the walls folding inward, the roof collapsing in on itself. Within seconds, it was gone. The land swallowed it whole, leaving behind only a wide circle of dirt and a trail of smoke. She fell to her knees, the sight blurring through tears. The world her grandfather had built, his work, his dreams, buried again, this time forever. But she was alive. Somewhere beneath the rubble, Langford and his men were gone. The secret was safe. Linda sat in the wet grass, shaking, her hands caked with blood and dirt. The letter had survived. She could feel it pressed against her chest beneath her jacket. She pulled it free and reread the last line, her voice breaking as she spoke it aloud. Choose light. The sun finally broke over the horizon, washing the field in gold. Smoke rose like a curtain dissolving into morning air. Linda closed her eyes, breathing deeply for the first time in what felt like forever. She thought of her grandfather's hands building the machines, of her fiancé's quiet laughter, of all the lives lost chasing control over something meant to free them. What does it mean to protect the truth, if the cost is everything you love? If this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. We share stories that explore courage, sacrifice, and what it means to stand for what's right. 3 weeks passed before the smoke from that night faded from the horizon, and even longer before the rest of the world caught its scent. The headlines came first in whispers, tucked into obscure corners of the news. Orion Technologies under federal investigation. Then came the flood. Photos of raids, seized documents, executives in handcuffs. Words like fraud, illegal weapons programs, and classified research flooded every network. Each report traced the evidence back to one buried source, the lost research of Silas Brooks. Linda read it all from the quiet of her farmhouse, her name echoing through every broadcast. The woman who exposed the truth. The media called her brave, reckless, revolutionary. But she had never spoken to a single journalist. She watched from behind drawn curtains as news vans occasionally appeared at the end of her drive, cameras aimed at the burned patch of earth where the barn once stood. Some reporters shouted her name into the wind, promising her story would change the world. She never answered. The world didn't need her words. It needed her silence. At night, she would sit at the old kitchen table with her grandfather's letter beside her, the edges worn soft from how often she'd unfolded it. In the corner of the room sat the last piece of his legacy, a small containment core she had recovered from the wreckage near the silo. The true heart of Project Aegis. A device the size of her palm, glowing faintly when touched. Clean, self-sustaining, limitless. She kept it sealed in a lead-lined case, wrapped in cloth. Every time she opened it, she could feel its quiet hum, like a heartbeat under metal. It wasn't just energy, it was potential. Salvation or destruction. Exactly as he'd warned. When the investigations deepened, Linda received a discreet visit from 2 scientists representing an independent foundation, the ARC Initiative, funded by universities and humanitarian groups, dedicated to developing ethical technology. They had been working on renewable systems for decades, but what Linda carried was beyond anything they had ever seen. She met them in a quiet conference room at a state office, away from reporters and away from Orion's remaining influence. One of the scientists, a woman in her 50s with steady eyes, spoke softly. "Ms. Brooks, if this is what we think it is, it could change everything. Energy, medicine, the environment. But it must be handled with restraint." Linda nodded. "That's why I'm not keeping it. My grandfather built this for light, not power. If you use it, promise me you'll remember that." The woman looked at her for a long moment, then extended her hand. "You have my word." Linda placed the sealed case on the table. For a second, her reflection shimmered in the polished steel surface. It felt like letting go of a part of herself, a part that had carried fear, grief, and responsibility far beyond what one person should bear. When she stepped outside, the air felt different, lighter somehow. Over the following weeks, more truths surfaced. Declassified files revealed that Orion had falsified patents, misused government funds, and covered up the deaths of several scientists during testing incidents decades earlier. Her grandfather's name appeared in every report, no longer as a fugitive, but as a man who had tried to stop it all. It didn't erase what had been lost, but it gave it meaning. One morning, Linda drove into town for the first time in months. The locals nodded politely as she passed, their eyes full of quiet respect. Some waved. Others simply stared, unsure how to speak to someone whose name had become a headline. She didn't stay long. There was somewhere else she needed to go. The cemetery sat on a hill overlooking the river, where the water shimmered under the spring sun. Linda parked beneath the old oak and followed the narrow path between the graves, her shoes brushing the wild grass. She stopped at the stone she had visited so many times before. Daniel Reed, 1992 to 2024. Her knees bent as she sank to the ground. The silence around her felt clean. No sirens, no explosions, no echoes of fear. Just the soft sound of wind through leaves. She brushed her fingers along the carved name and smiled faintly. "You'd probably tell me I'm crazy," she whispered. "But we did it. We really did. The truth's out. The people who used his work for the wrong reasons, they'll never touch it again." A tear rolled down her cheek before she could stop it. "You always said I'd find a way to make things right. I just didn't know it would be like this." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small metal keychain shaped like a compass, the last gift he had given her before the accident. The needle still pointed true. She laid it gently at the base of the stone. "For you," she said. "We finally did something good." For a long moment, she stayed there, eyes closed, feeling the warmth of sunlight on her skin. The weight she had carried for months, grief, guilt, responsibility, seemed to loosen its hold. In the distance, church bells began to ring, slow and steady, like the earth itself was taking a deep breath. Linda rose, dusted her hands, and looked toward the horizon. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of what lay beyond it. The world would always hunger for power. But maybe, just maybe, it was ready to learn restraint. A quiet question lingered in her thoughts as she walked back toward her car. If you had the power to change the world, would you trust it in someone else's hands, or your own? Spring returned slowly, as if testing whether the land was ready to live again. The charred earth near the barn had given way to tender shoots of green. The fields, once broken by drought and fire, shimmered under the weight of new rain. The farmhouse stood tall once more, its wood pale and clean, the windows open to the scent of wet soil and lilacs. It wasn't grand, but it was alive. Every board carried the touch of rebuilding, of second chances. Inside, morning light filtered through white curtains and fell across the crib beside the window. Linda stood there in her robe, rocking her newborn son in her arms. His small breaths rose and fell against her chest, steady and sure. She looked out across the land, her reflection faint in the glass, her hair unbound, her face softer than it had been in months. In her arms, the child stirred, a faint smile forming in his sleep. The world outside was still marked by the scars of what had happened. The crater where the silo had sunk remained a hollow in the distance, but life had grown around it. Grass had crept back across the soil, as if time itself was healing what had been torn. On the table near the window sat a wooden keepsake box. She opened it slowly. Inside was the folded letter, yellowed from age and smoothed from countless readings. Her eyes traced her grandfather's handwriting one final time. She whispered the words softly, almost to herself. "The world wasn't ready for what I built. Perhaps you will be. Guard it well. It can power cities or destroy them. Choose light." Her voice trembled slightly at the end, but her gaze remained steady. She folded the letter again, pressed it to her lips, and placed it gently back inside the box. The lid closed with a quiet click. Outside, the wind rose through the valley, carrying the sound of distant turbines turning along the far ridge, tall, graceful shapes that moved like slow clock hands against the morning sky. Energy born of air and patience, not greed or destruction. Linda smiled faintly. Somewhere, she liked to think her grandfather could see it, that his dream had survived, not through machines or corporations, but through the quiet persistence of life rebuilding itself. She turned her attention back to her son. His eyes fluttered open, blue and wide, curious at the light spilling across the room. She touched his cheek. "You don't know it yet," she whispered, "but this land carries a story. Your great-grandfather tried to save something the world wasn't ready for. He thought the best way to protect it was to bury it. But maybe the real answer wasn't to hide power, it was to teach the world how to use it." She paused, her words soft as the wind brushing the glass. "Some inherit money. Some inherit pain. I inherited a choice. And maybe that's the greatest gift of all." The baby let out a small sound, half a sigh, half a laugh. She smiled and drew him closer, pressing her forehead to his. Outside, the rain eased. Sunlight broke through the clouds in quiet streaks, lighting the edges of the fields where new grass glistened with dew. Birds moved through the air in slow arcs, their wings flashing silver in the light. The hum of the turbines deepened, rhythmic and sure, blending with the rustle of the wind through the trees. It was the same sound Silas might have imagined when he dreamed of a world powered by clean energy, a sound that spoke not of conquest, but of continuity. Linda watched the horizon, her son's heart beat soft against her chest. The farmhouse, the fields, the turbines, the sky, all of it seemed to breathe in unison. For the first time, she wasn't haunted by what was buried beneath the land. She understood now that legacy wasn't about preserving secrets, it was about passing forward the will to protect what mattered. In the corner of the room, beside the keepsake box, sat a new blueprint she'd begun sketching in pencil. Nothing ambitious, just a model for a small solar array she hoped to install on the property, something that would make the house self-sufficient. It felt like the right beginning. A quiet laugh escaped her as she whispered, "You'd like that, Grandpa. No more hiding underground. Just light where it belongs." She lifted her son again, swaying gently by the window. His eyes closed, his breathing slowed, and his tiny hand wrapped around her finger, warm, unshakable, real. The camera drifts back, pulling slowly away from the window, through the open air, until the farmhouse becomes a small shape amid the wide green valley. The land stretches out, reborn, alive, with the turbines spinning like sentinels along the horizon. The hum of their blades lingers as the image softens to light. Her voice returns one last time, steady and reflective. What would you protect if the world wasn't ready for it? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Your support helps us share more stories like this. Stories of courage, legacy, and the power to choose light. Tell us where you're watching from, subscribe for more powerful stories, and stay tuned because tomorrow we'll drop another story you won't want to miss. Your support helps us keep bringing you these stories.